Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm downtown in the Inner Harbor at Pierce's Park. If you haven't been here, it is wonderful. It's got all sorts of things for kids to climb on and spin on and make music on. It's got homophones written in the sidewalk. If you don't know what a homophone is, maybe this present video will be a little bit of a vocabulary building present to you. Go look it up. But we're here because this park got started about 10 years ago in honor of a local businessman named Pierce Flanagan. And there were all sorts of folks who raised money for it. And at the center of that partnership was the Baltimore Community Foundation. And we're helping them celebrate their 50th anniversary. They got started in 1972. And we're going to do two videos. Today we're going to talk about how they got their start. And then we're going to do a second video talking about some of the great projects that they've done over the 50 years, helping make Baltimore what it is today. I'm even more thrilled because I'm going to be joined by Shanaysha Sauls, who heads up the Community Foundation. But before I turn it over to her, let me just say a few words about how community foundations got their start and what they are. For that, we need to turn back the clock to 1914 and head over to Cleveland, Ohio, and meet up with a lawyer and a banker named Frederick Goff. Let me make sure I get his name right. And Goff was somewhat of a sensation in Cleveland, but he got kind of a humble start. He moved with his family in the late 1800s from rural Illinois. He was about 6 years old and was put in a boxcar with their most prized possession, a horse. They got to Cleveland all right, but by about age 10, he had jumped on a ship and spent a year as a crew in the Great Lakes, sailing around the Great Lakes as a 10-year-old. When he got back, he eventually settled down and got a law degree. Even that career started out somewhat humbly. His first month, he made all of $2.40, a little less than $50 today, so not a whopping start there. But eventually, he became a partner in one of Cleveland's most prestigious firms. And if you're a lawyer or you're in the legal world, you might know that firm today. It's Jones Day, with offices all over the world. It's probably one of the biggest firms going. But Goff was a lawyer for only about 20 years, and then he got convinced to join the Cleveland Trust as its first full-time president, and he did that to try to take the bank in a direction that he called the People's Bank. And he, as a banker, struggled with the same problem he struggled with as a lawyer. And that was he had people coming to him wanting to leave money for the betterment of Cleveland for the long term. But because neither he nor his clients were clairvoyant, they didn't know where to put it, that in 25 or 50 years it would do the best for the city of Cleveland. Here is what he had to say in his own words. How fine would it be if someone who is about to make a will could go to a permanently established organization and say, here is a large sum of money. I want to leave it to be used for the good of the community, but I have no way of knowing what will be the greatest need 50 years from now. Therefore, I place it in your hands to determine what should be done. And that, in a nutshell, is a community foundation. It's a permanent organization, philanthropic organization, but flexible so that it can adapt to the needs of whatever community it is over time. The idea took off. Pretty soon there were foundations in in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, in Youngstown, Ohio. Today, there are community foundations, with the Cleveland Community Foundation as the first one in 1914, all over the world. There's one in Russia, there's one in Afghanistan, there's one in Mozambique. So really great idea. We were a little late to the community foundation game. Ours did not get started in 1914 or even 1920 or even 1950. But in 1972, a group of Baltimore leaders got together and formed our own Baltimore Community Foundation. And with that, I'm going to end and turn it over to Shanaysha to talk about that chapter. Here you are. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Johns. I'm Shanaysha Sauls, the Baltimore Community Foundation President and CEO. We are gearing up to celebrate our 50th anniversary, and today I'm excited to share a little bit about how we got started back in 1972. The idea of starting a community foundation began with a man by the name of Robert Levy, who was the vice president of what was then the Mercantile Bank and Trust Company, today's PNC. Mercantile, with the largest commercial banks in town, the First National Bank of Maryland, Maryland National, Equitable Trust, and Suburban Trust, got together and they agreed that it was time to start a community foundation for the Baltimore area. Mr. Levy was our first chairman, And he said that Baltimore needed a philanthropic organization that was a gathering of all people, no color line, no religious affiliation, and no single cause. This organization would have a bird's eye view of the things that would make Baltimore a better place and the ability to gather the resources in order to make those things happen. That remains BCF's mission even today. Mr. Levy, like Mr. Goff in Cleveland, was a remarkable man, as were many of the co-founders and early leaders of BCF. Mr. Levy was the president of the Hat Company. He was one of the co-founders of the Greater Baltimore Committee, a supporter of the BSO, and a trustee of important institutions here like Goucher College, Hopkins University, and the Walters Art Museum. We were so lucky that some of the most visionary and successful business leaders of our time, Henry G. Parks, Robert Merrick, and Joseph Meyerhoff, were a part of BCF's founding. Now, the early days were slow growth for BCF. Although we had an initial endowment, it was nowhere near the $10 million that most people agreed was the minimum to make an impact. So the board brought in Eugene Struckoff, and his goal was to start our first campaign. And that campaign was to raise $10 million for impact. And BCF succeeded under his leadership. And even though we were distributing about $1 million a year into the community, the leaders of Baltimore thought that it needed to do more and that BCF should be doing more for the community. People were looking around at places like Cleveland and other cities and their community foundations and thought, we need to set higher ambitions for Baltimore. Sheldon Goldsecker, the chairman of the Morris Goldsecker Foundation, came up with a proposition. What if we combined BCF and the Goldsecker Foundation to create a partnership of two different organizations united by one CEO? And the goal of this partnership of those two distinct organizations was to exponentially grow charitable giving in Baltimore. And boy, did they succeed. By the end of the 1990s, the end of the 20th century, BCF had amassed $100 million in assets. It was time to strike out on its own. So in 2000, fully independent, BCF brought on its own president and CEO, Mr. Tom Wilcox, who served and led for 17 years, nearly 2 decades. And during this period of the 2000s, BCF not only grew, but it also used its resources to create new initiatives in order to support and fill gaps in Baltimore. So programs like Healthy Neighborhoods and later Judy Centers, and also smaller focus programs like the Teacher Appreciation Fund, the Safe and Sound Campaign, and Great Kids Farm were all launched during this era. Today, BCF has more than 850 different funds, and those funds support people and projects throughout the region, from arts to education to neighborhoods to basic human services. But I'm going to stop there and invite you to join us for the second video, where Johns and I will talk a bit about the ways that BCF has made impact over the last 50 years. You will recognize a few of the projects and most certainly the people behind them. So thank you, and we'll see you then.